The elders say love is a seed planted in the dark. You cannot see it growing. You only know it lives when, one morning, it breaks through stone. The gun was already pressed to the back of Temilade Osei's head before she had time to scream. She was sitting in the chair she had been told to sit in. Third seat from the left, in a private dining room on the 42nd floor of Seoul's most discreet hotel. The room smelled of chrysanthemum tea and something older, something she couldn't name. Her hands were flat on the table, palms down, exactly as instructed. She had not come here willingly. She had come because the message delivered to her clinic that morning said 3 words that made every other option disappear. We have Kofi. Kofi, her younger brother, the only family she had left in the world. Don't move.
Don't move, you,
said a voice behind her. Male, Korean accent sharpened to a blade. Don't speak. Don't even breathe too loudly. Temilade Osei did not move, but she breathed. Slow,
Don't move, you,
deliberate. The breath of a woman who has spent 12 years working in conflict zones and refugee camps and who learned long ago that panic was a luxury she could not afford. The door at the far end of the room opened, and the man who walked in was not at all what she expected. He was tall, taller than she had imagined from the whisper she'd heard over the last 48 hours. Young, too, mid-30s perhaps, with a face that was almost unsettlingly composed. As if all the emotions ordinary people wore on their skin had been carefully folded away inside him, pressed flat like old letters. He wore a dark charcoal suit with no tie and a single red silk pocket square that caught the light like a wound. He looked at her for a long, unhurried moment. Then he looked at the man with the gun. Put it away, Hyojun. Sir, she came without... I said, put it away. The pressure against Temilade's skull disappeared. She exhaled slowly, allowing herself exactly 3 seconds to feel the relief before she locked it back down. The man sat across from her, folding himself into the chair with the practiced ease of someone who had done this, sat across from frightened people in quiet rooms more times than she could count. You are Dr. Temilade Osei, he said. It was not a question. Founder of the Osei Mobile Health Initiative, former field medic with Médecins Sans Frontières. You have worked in 7 conflict zones across 3 continents. You are 34 years old, you have no living parents, and you have a younger brother currently being held on a trafficking charge in Incheon that everyone in this room knows is fabricated. Temilade held his gaze. And you are Baek Sejin, she said, 3rd son of Baek Sejin, head of the Baek Organization's international interests. You are 36 years old, you control 17 shell companies across 4 continents, and you have a reputation for being the most dangerous man in any room. Until you open your mouth and start quoting people's files back at them, which makes you sound like a man who is trying too hard to be intimidating. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. And then, impossibly, terrifyingly, Baek Sejin smiled. It was a small thing, a fracture in the stone, but it was real. They told me you were direct, he said. They told me you were ruthless, she replied. We are both apparently meeting the wrong version. He tilted his head slightly, studying her the way a scientist studies something that has begun behaving outside its expected parameters. Your brother, he said. The charges will disappear by tomorrow morning. He will be released. He will not be touched. Temilade's heart lurched once, like a misstep on a staircase. And in return, Sejin said, pouring tea for them both as calmly as a man pouring water at Sunday brunch, you will listen to what I have to say. That is all. Just listen. He slid the cup toward her. She looked at it. She looked at him. She picked it up. Before we go any further, if you are new here, subscribe. We tell stories that stay with you. And we want to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments right now. The tea was good. That bothered her more than anything. It should have tasted like manipulation. It should have tasted like threat and coercion and all the invisible walls that had closed around her the moment she stepped into that elevator. Instead, it tasted like honey and something floral she could not identify, warm against the back of her throat, and she hated that she noticed. Baek Sejin spoke for 20 minutes. He did not rush. He did not perform. He spoke the way men speak when they have decided to be honest, which in her experience was either the most dangerous kind of speech or the most rare. She could not yet tell which this was. The situation was this. The Baek organization had, over the last 2 years, been quietly funding a network of informal medical clinics along the Incheon-Seoul corridor. The clinics served people who could not navigate the official health system. Undocumented workers, women escaping difficult situations, families who had fallen through the cracks of a system that did not always see them. The clinics were good work. Funding came from bank accounts, carefully laundered, carefully hidden. The problem was that the doctors running them were burning out, cycling through faster than they could be replaced. And in 3 of the clinics, care had deteriorated to the point of genuine harm. You want me to fix your clinics? Temilade said flatly. I want you to build something that lasts, Sejin said. What we have now is charity. What I want is infrastructure. A real system. Sustainable. Staffed by people who are trained properly and paid properly, and who stay. He leaned forward, just slightly. You have done this before. In Liberia.
You know how to build medicine in places the official world does not look. Those places didn't have the backing of an organized crime network, Temilade said. No, Sejin agreed. They had far less. She hated that he was right. She looked down at her cup, at the pale amber of the tea. Why do you fund the clinics? The real reason, not the polished version. Another pause. Longer this time. My mother died waiting for care she could not afford, Sejin said quietly. She was 51 years old, and she died in a hospital corridor because the paperwork was wrong and the money was not there, and no one in that building felt responsible for her. I was 19. I'd just joined my father's business because I believed it was the only kind of power that mattered. He looked at Temilade steadily. I have not stopped asking, in the years since, whether I was wrong about that. The room was very quiet. What would you do if someone dangerous offered to fund the work you believe in most? Would you walk away? I genuinely want to know your answer. Comment below. Temilade set down her cup. I have conditions, she said. I assumed you would. The clinics operate independently. I control the medical decisions. No interference, no pressure, no using patients as leverage for anything your organization wants. The moment I believe that is happening, I'll leave. No negotiation, no second chance. Agreed. The staff are paid properly. Not generously, properly, competitively, so they can afford to stay. Agreed. And my brother. She paused, hating the vulnerability of even saying it. This never happens again. He is not leverage. He is not a contact. He is a 22-year-old studying electrical engineering, and he has nothing to do with any of this. Sejin looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it. Agreed, he said. And I apologize for using him. It was necessary at the time. I do not expect you to forgive it. Temilade stood up, smoothing her jacket. I don't forgive it, she said, but I will work with you anyway, because the clinics matter more than my feelings. She extended her hand. We start on Monday. Sejin stood and shook it. His grip was steady and warm and lasted exactly the right length of time. She walked to the door, stopped. The red pocket square,
she said, without turning around.
Does it mean something in your organization?
A beat.
It means the person wearing it is not to be harmed, Sejin said, by anyone, under any circumstances. She turned to look at him over her shoulder. That sounds like a rule you made for yourself. The corner of his mouth lifted. Most of the important ones are.
3 months later, the Yongsan clinic smelled like antiseptic and rice porridge, and on any given Tuesday, it held between 30 and 60 people in a waiting room designed for 20. Temilade had not slept more than 5 hours on any night since she arrived in Seoul. She admitted to herself in her quietest moments, the happiest she had been in years. The work was hard and necessary and real. She had hired a staff of 9, 2 Korean doctors who had left the private sector for reasons they stated as philosophical, 3 nurses recruited from community health programs, 2 administrators who could navigate 4 languages between them, and 2 young health workers she was training herself, both of them women who had come to the clinic first as patients and then stayed because they wanted to learn. She barely saw Baek Sejin. This was both a relief and, she was beginning to notice with some irritation, a disappointment. He sent reports, precise, detailed reports covering the financial position of each clinic, delivered every 2 weeks by Hyojun, the same man who had held the gun to her head and who had since developed the habit of bringing her instant coffee from the convenience store downstairs without being asked. She did not comment on this. She drank the coffee. Occasionally there was a handwritten note with the report. Short sentences, precise observations, nothing personal. The Incheon clinic staff turnover is stabilized. Your training model appears to be working. I noticed the waiting room chairs were replaced. Good choice. Your brother texted to say he passed his midterms. I thought you would want to know. I did not tell him I knew. That last one sat with her for longer than it should have. Then came the Thursday when everything shifted. She was finishing a late-night shift when a man was brought in through the clinic's back entrance, a man I did not recognize, carried between 2 people I did not know, bleeding from a wound in his abdomen that told me immediately she had perhaps 40 minutes to work with. "What happened?" she demanded, already moving. "Bar fight," one of the carriers said, which was almost certainly not true. Temilade did not have time to care about almost certainly. She had 40 minutes, or less, and a man who was going to die if she stood here asking questions. She worked for 3 hours. The man lived. At some point during the second hour, she became aware that Baek Sejin had arrived. He stood outside the room, visible through the glass panel in the door, not interfering, not leaving, just present, watching. When she finally emerged, hands still trembling slightly from the sustained concentration, he was still there. "You should have sent him to a proper hospital," she said. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "I'm not a surgeon. I do not have a proper surgical theater. I managed, but I should not have had to manage, and if he had died—" "I know," Sejin said. "You know." She looked at him directly. In the harsh fluorescent light of the clinic corridor, he looked different than he did in the hotel dining rooms and glass-walled offices she had seen him in before. Less polished, more human. There were shadows under his eyes, and his jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled up, and she could see that his hands were not quite steady either, though he was working hard not to show it. "Is he one of yours?" "He is someone I grew up with," Sejin said. "He made choices over the years that put him in rooms like this one. That is not your concern." "It is absolutely my concern, because he was in my clinic and his choices nearly cost him his life,"
Sejin was quiet then.
Then, his name is Daesu. We were children together. He is the only person left in the world who calls me by my first name without permission. Temilade looked at him. She thought about the woman who died in a hospital corridor. The 19-year-old who joined his father's business because he believed it was the only kind of power that mattered. The handwritten notes that contained no personal information, except the ones that did. He's going to need follow-up care for at least 2 weeks, she said finally. Tell him he is not to lift anything heavier than a cup of water. And tell your people to bring their injured here instead of to some back room next time. Because a back room does not have what I have here. And I would rather know what I am dealing with than be surprised. Sejin looked at her for a long moment. You're angry with me, he said. I'm tired, Temilade said. It feels similar. She turned to go back inside. Stopped. Said without turning, he's stable. He's gonna be fine. You can stop holding your breath. She heard him exhale. A long, slow release of something that had been held too tight for too long. She went back to her patient. She did not look at the door. But she listened, for a long time after, to make sure his footsteps did not leave.
The elders have a saying, in many African traditions, though the language differs, the wisdom is the same. Love does not knock. It simply begins living in your house, uninvited, rearranging the furniture, until one day you realize you have been making space for it all along. Temilade Osei did not fall in love with Baek Sejin the way it happens in stories. There was no single moment, no one breath, no first kiss that changed everything. Instead, it was a slow accumulation, 100 small things gathered over months that she refused to name for as long as she possibly could. It was the way he remembered details, the minor things she had mentioned in passing, that she had grown up learning to cook jollof rice from her grandmother's recipe, that she could not sleep when it rained too hard, that she had wanted to be a dancer before she wanted to be a doctor, would reappear weeks later in some small gesture. A meal sent to the clinic with a note that said only, tried a different variation, tell me if it is close. A playlist left on a shared work drive titled simply Rain. A tiny framed photograph of the Accra Dance Academy, which she had mentioned exactly once, hung without comment on the wall of the office they had agreed she would use when she came to the main Baek building for meetings. It was the way he listened. She had known powerful men before, men who listened the way they read documents, scanning for the relevant information, discarding the rest. Sejin listened the way archaeologists dig, carefully, completely, with the understanding that everything beneath the surface had value if you paid attention long enough. It was the way he never pushed, never pressed, never leaned across the invisible line she had drawn between their working relationship and anything else, even on the evenings when she could feel that line growing thin, wearing through like cloth rubbed too long between two hands. And it was the thing she was most afraid to examine, that she had stopped wanting him to stay on the other side of it. She told herself it was gratitude. The clinics were flourishing. Daesu had recovered and had started quietly volunteering at the Yongsan location, teaching a basic first aid course on Saturdays with a kind of earnest dedication that she found unexpectedly moving. Kofi had visited for a week in the spring and had spent an evening talking with Sejin about engineering and architecture, while Temilade pretended to read and actually watched them from across the room, disturbed by how naturally it felt. She told herself it was proximity. She told herself it would pass. Then the evening came when she walked into the Baek building's top floor office for a quarterly review and found Sejin standing at the window, looking out at the Seoul skyline, and he turned when she came in, and the look on his face before he could compose it, the unguarded relief of someone who has been waiting for a specific person and is glad they arrived, nearly undid every wall she had built. "You're early," he said. "You're not looking at any reports," she replied, glancing at the empty desk. I was thinking. "About the clinics?" A pause. No. The air in the room changed. She felt it, the way weather changes before rain. A pressure shift. Something becoming possible that had not been possible before. Temilade set her folder on the table. Sat down. Looked at him steadily. "Sejin," she said, and she watched his face do something complicated at the sound of his name in her voice. She almost never used it. "We should talk about what this is." He came away from the window. Sat down across from her. Not at the head of the table the way he always did in meetings, but directly across. Close enough that I could see the details of his face clearly. "I have been trying," he said, "to give you every opportunity to leave." "I know," she said. "I've been trying to take it. And yet, I agreed." Do you think love can survive the kind of distance two people put between themselves out of wisdom? Out of fear? Let me know what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments. They sat for a long moment in a silence that was not uncomfortable. "This is not simple," Temilade said. "You know that. The world you live in, what it costs people who get close to you. I have seen the wounds, Sejin.
I have treated them. I know what the risk is." "Yes," he said. There was no performance in his agreement, no attempt to minimize or reassure. It was the thing she trusted most about him, that he did not pretend. "And I'm not someone who needs to be rescued," she continued, "or protected, or managed. I'm someone who needs to be treated as an equal in all things, including the things that are dangerous." "I know," he said. "I've known that since the first night, when you told me my intimidation tactics sounded like a man trying too hard." A small, real smile. No one had ever said that to me before. Did it help or hurt? "Both," he said honestly. "Mostly it made me want to know every other thing you were going to say." Temilade looked at him. She felt the weight of the choice, the real specific weight of it, the way important choices always feel like something physical, something you carry. "I'm going to say something," she said, "and I need you to understand that I'm saying it from a place of clarity, not fear and not feeling. Because I've spent my whole career making clear-eyed decisions in hard situations, and I will not stop now, all right?" he said softly. "I am not willing to be something hidden," she said. "I am not willing to be kept apart from your real life, managed at a careful distance, visible only in the rooms where I am convenient. If this is something, it is something real. It is present at the table. It is honest. It is not a secret I keep from myself." Sejin held her gaze. There was something in his eyes that she recognized, not for the first time, as a man who has spent a very long time being alone in a way that does not announce itself. "I have never wanted anything hidden in my life," he said. "I am tired of things I cannot say out loud." She nodded, once. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. The Seoul skyline burned orange and gold outside the window. Neither of them looked at the reports. 6 months later. Something was wrong. Temilade felt it before she understood it. The way certain kinds of trouble announce themselves in the body before the mind can explain them. A coldness in the air between them. A timing that began to slip. Calls that went to voicemail too often. Eyes that held hers at dinner, but did not quite land.
She told herself it was the pressure of whatever was happening in Sejin's world, the thing he still did not fully share with her, the operations and the rivals, and the invisible architecture of power that she had agreed to coexist with, even if she did not participate in it. She told herself it was temporary, that he was managing something, that he would tell her when he could. Then, she found out from Dae-soo. Not deliberately. Dae-soo was not a man who betrayed confidences on purpose. But one Saturday afternoon, after his first aid class, he sat with her over coffee and said, with the careful gentleness of someone who believes someone else already knows what he is about to say, "He is doing it to protect you. I want you to know that before anyone tells you differently." Temilade set down her cup. "Tell me what you mean." Dae-soo looked at her, looked at his own hands. "The Gim family," he said, finally. "They have been watching the clinics for 4 months. They know what you are to them. They made a proposal to Sejin's father, not to Sejin, that if Sejin steps back from his international operations, if he gives up the territories he has built, they will leave you and everything you have built untouched." The room was very quiet. "And Sejin's father accepted this proposal," Temilade said. "Not a question." Dae-soo looked at his hands again. "Sejin has been negotiating how to do it," he said. "How to restructure things. He has not told you because he does not want you to feel. He does not want it to seem like you are the reason he is losing something."
Temilade stood up from the table. "Where is he right now?" she said. "Temi." "Dae-soo." Her voice was quiet and absolutely still. "Where is he?" She found him in the Yongsan building he used for his most private meetings. He was alone, sitting at a long table covered in documents, and he looked up when she walked in, and she saw the knowledge in his eyes, that Dae-soo had told her, or that she had found out some other way, or perhaps simply that she had the face of a woman who knows. He started to speak. She held up one hand. "Do not," she said, "tell me it was to protect me. I know it was to protect me. I do not want your protection if it comes with silence. I do not want to be kept from things that concern me as if I am something fragile. I am not fragile, Sejin." "I know you're not," he said. His voice was tight in a way she rarely heard. "Then why?" "Because..." He stopped, started again. "Because I have taken so many things from people in my life. I have built so much on foundations that cost others more than they should have. And the clinics, what you have built, what it means for those people, I could not stand to be the reason that ends. I could not stand to look at you and know that your work, your life's work, was endangered because of what I am." Temilade crossed the room and sat across from him. "Listen to me carefully," she said. "You do not get to decide what my work costs me. You do not get to calculate that price on my behalf and then make the choice without me. We agreed. Do you remember? We agreed. Equal in all things, including the dangerous ones." "Yes," he said. "Did you mean that?" A long pause. "I wanted to mean it. Wanting is not enough." She leaned forward. "Sejin, I have spent 12 years in places where giving up something to protect something else was an everyday decision. I know the weight of it. I know what it costs, and I know how to carry it. You do not have to carry it alone, and you do not have to carry it for me." He looked at her for a long moment,
looked at her the way he had looked at her in that first hotel room, with the careful attention of a man reading something written in a language he is still learning. "If I make this concession," he said slowly, "the GM family will not stop there. They will see it as a weakness. They will press again and again until there is nothing left." "Then we do not make the concession on their terms," she said. "We find another way." "There may not be. There is always another way," she said. "I have never once been in a situation that had no other way. You just have to be willing to look for it instead of accepting the one you were given. What would you have done if you were Temilade? Would you have stayed? Would you have fought? Tell me in the comments." He was quiet for a very long time. Then, "What is the other way?" She opened her bag and pulled out a folder she had been carrying for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment, uncertain if the moment would ever come. "I have been contacted," she said, "by the Ministry of Health, through my work with the clinics. They want to discuss a formal partnership, a government-backed expansion of the mobile health model into 6 more regions. It would require the clinics to come out of the shadows, to be public, registered, visible, no longer funded by your accounts." She watched him understand what she was saying. "If the clinics are public," he said slowly, "the GM family cannot use them as leverage. And if you divest formally from the medical operations, if it can be shown that the Baek organization has no operational connection to the clinics, they have nothing to threaten." "It removes the weapon," he said. "It removes the weapon," she confirmed. The room was very quiet. "You have been planning this," Sejin said. "While I was keeping this from you, you were already building a way out." "I was building a way forward," she corrected gently.
There's a difference. He looked at the folder, looked at her, and she saw something happen in his eyes that was difficult to describe. Not simply relief, but something older and deeper. The look of a man who has spent a very long time believing that the only solutions available to him were the ones forged in darkness, confronting the sudden, startling possibility of light. "I'm sorry," he said, "for the silence, for trying to protect you without including you. I will not do it again." "No," she agreed. "You won't." She reached across the table and opened the folder between them. "Now," she said, "let's find the other way."
The trouble, when it came, did not arrive at the front door. It never does. It was a Wednesday evening in early winter when Temilade's clinic in Yongsan received 3 new patients in the space of 20 minutes. Not patients exactly, but men sent by the Gim family, carrying no injuries, but a message delivered in the particular language of overturned furniture and shattered equipment, and one of her young health workers left shaken in a corner, unhurt physically, her eyes hollow with a fear that would take weeks to heal. Temilade was not there when it happened. She was at a meeting with the ministry, signing the first stage of the partnership agreement, her phone on silent in her jacket pocket, the future of the clinics being written in careful official language across a gleaming table 30 kilometers away. She found out from Daesu, who called her 7 times in 6 minutes. She did not cry. She drove back to the clinic and she sat with her young health worker, Sora, 23 years old, who had come to the clinic first as a patient, fleeing something she had never fully named, and who had stayed because she said it was the first place she had ever felt useful. And she held Sora's hands and spoke quietly until the shaking slowed. Then she called Sejin. He answered on the first ring. She could tell from the quality of his silence after she spoke that he already knew.
that someone had called him before she did, that he was already managing this, or trying to. "No one moves," she said. "Not yet. Not until we talk. Tammy, promise me." A pause, long enough that she could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, long enough that I could feel the distance between the world she had built and the world he lived in, the unbridgeable gap that I had spent a year pretending was smaller than it was. "I promise," he said. "Come to me." She drove across the city in the cold.
He was waiting for her at the door of the building. Not inside, not upstairs behind glass and polished surfaces and the careful architecture of authority. He was waiting at the door, his coat open, his hands loose at his sides, and when she got out of the car, he did not move toward her, just stood and let her come to him, which she understood was its own kind of courtesy. She walked up and stood in front of him and looked at his face. "Tell me the truth," she said. "Not the version that protects me. The whole truth. The GM family did this," he said, "because the ministry partnership is moving forward, and they know they are losing their leverage. This is panic, not strategy. They are acting out of fear, which makes them more dangerous, not less. Yes. And the formal channels, police, law enforcement, are not an option." It was not a question. She knew the answer. "No," he said. "Not in the time frame we need." She looked at him steadily. "What would you do if I were not here? If you were making this decision the way you have always made decisions?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I would make them understand," he said carefully, "that the cost of continued interference outweighs any benefit they believe they can gain, through means that would make this conversation much more complicated. And that means people get hurt. Yes. People who may or may not deserve it. In my world," he said, very quietly, "those calculations are rarely as clear as they should be." Temilade looked away, at the cold city, at the lights reflected in the winter dark streets. She thought about everything she had built over the last year. The people in those waiting rooms, sore shaking hands, Daesu teaching his first aid class with the careful earnestness of a man making peace with himself. She thought about the boy who was 19 years old when his mother died in a hospital corridor, and who had been trying, imperfectly and at great cost, to build something better ever since. She turned back to him. "There is another option," she said.
"There is not. There is," she said. "The GM family wants the clinics as leverage. The ministry partnership removes that leverage, but the agreement does not fully complete for another 6 weeks. 6 weeks during which we are vulnerable." She paused. "But what if we change the timeline? What if the ministry made an announcement, a public announcement, widely covered, about the partnership before the formal completion? Something that makes the clinic so visibly public, so deeply embedded in official recognition, that any action against them becomes an action against the government's program." Sejin looked at her. "The ministry would need a reason to move that quickly." "I will give them a reason," she said. "I will give them a story, the story of the clinics, told fully, including where the funding came from and why and what it built. Not to expose you, but to demonstrate that the work was worth doing regardless of its origin. A story about what medicine looks like when it reaches people who have been forgotten." "That story," Sejin said slowly, "implicates my organization. The medical funding, yes, presented in the most favorable possible light, as an unconventional private investment in public health, ahead of official support. I believe the ministry will see the value in absorbing that narrative rather than fighting it." She met his eyes. "I have spoken, informally,
to the senior official. She is a practical woman. She understands that origin stories are complicated. The cold air hung between them. You have been building this for longer than 3 weeks, Sejin said. Not an accusation, something closer to wonder. I have been thinking about it, she said, since the night you told me about the GM family, and I understood that the only real protection was visibility. The only armor against the dark is light. He looked at her for a very long time. If this goes wrong, he said, if the ministry responds poorly, if the narrative becomes something we cannot control, then we deal with what comes, she said, together. He breathed in, breathed out.
You are the bravest person I have ever known, he said. And I have known some extraordinary people. I'm also right, she said. That helps. Despite everything, the cold, the fear, the weight of what was at stake, he laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, rising into the night air like smoke. She took his hand. They went inside. The announcement came on a Thursday. The Ministry of Health held a press conference at 10 in the morning with 3 senior officials and a display of photographs from the clinics. Sora teaching a community health class, the Incheon waiting room full of families, a child receiving a vaccination with the careful attention of a nurse who had learned her craft in a mobile unit on the outskirts of a city that was only beginning to see her. The framing was careful and deliberate, a story about a gap in the health system and the unconventional private investment that had filled it while the official channels were finding their way. A story about what could be built when people who were motivated by different things were nonetheless motivated toward the same end. Sejin's name was not mentioned. The Baek organization was not mentioned. What was mentioned was the Osei Mobile Health Initiative and its founder and the extraordinary work of the preceding 18 months. Temilade sat in the front row and kept her face composed through all of it and thought about her grandmother's kitchen in Accra and the smell of spices and ground nuts, and a woman who used to say, "The thing you plant in secret will bloom in public. Be careful what you bury." She had not buried the work. She had protected it long enough for it to take root. By Friday, the story had been picked up by 14 news outlets. By Saturday, 3 international medical organizations had reached out about partnerships. By Monday, the senior official from the ministry called Temilade personally to say that the response had exceeded every expectation and that she wanted to discuss an expanded agreement covering 12 regions rather than 6. The Gim family sent no further messages to the clinics. Whether this was because the leverage was gone or because Sejin had also had a conversation in a quiet room somewhere that she had decided not to ask about, Temilade did not know. She thought perhaps both. She thought perhaps this was what partnership actually looked like. Not the absence of his world, but the negotiation of it. The ongoing, imperfect, honest management of 2 people whose lives were not simple and who had chosen each other anyway. She thought about Patricia, the old surgeon, and the man who lived in shadows and came home to her for 30 years. She thought, I would not have traded a single moment. She thought, I am beginning to understand. 7 months later. There is always in the old stories one final test. Not a test sent by the gods necessarily, though the elders would have described it that way. A test that life constructs from the accumulated weight of every choice made and avoided.
The moment where everything you have built must be willing to answer for itself. It came in the form of Sejin's father. Baek Sejin had left the active running of the organization to his third son years before, which in their world meant anything between genuine retirement and strategic patience. He was 71 years old, and when he arrived in Seoul from wherever he had been for the past several years, it was with the quiet, total authority of a man who has never truly left any room he has walked into. Temilade met him once, briefly, at a dinner she attended at Sejin's request, a request made with more than usual care, with an explanation offered it was unusual for him, a kind of transparency she recognized as effort. The elder Baek was everything she expected and nothing she could have fully prepared for. Gracious, attentive, the kind of intelligent that does not announce itself, but sits in the room like furniture, present in everything, unmistakable once you see it. He spoke to her for perhaps 40 minutes over the course of the evening, in a mix of Korean and English that she matched without difficulty. He asked about the clinics. He asked about her training and her time with Médecins Sans Frontières. He asked about Ghana, about her grandmother, about what had made her want to be a doctor. He did not ask about Sejin. At the end of the evening, as she was preparing to leave, he found her briefly alone near the door. "My son," he said, "has never brought anyone to a family dinner before." "I know," she said. He studied her with those old, careful eyes. "My wife," he said, "was a woman who always knew more than she let on.
Who made decisions that looked like patience, but were actually strategy. Who protected the things she cared about by making them too important to attack." He paused. "I see something similar in you." Temilade met his eye steadily. "With respect," she said, "I'm not trying to protect your son. I'm trying to build something with him. There's a difference." The old man looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. A small, genuine, startling smile that reminded her completely of his son. "Yes," he said, "there is." He bowed slightly. She bowed back. The next morning, Sejin called her and said, in a voice that was trying very hard to be neutral, "My father would like to speak with you again, formally, about the future of the clinic network. He has some proposals." "What kind of proposals?" she asked. "The kind that suggests he approves," Sejin said, strongly. She was quiet for a moment. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I am..." He stopped, started again. "I did not know that I needed his approval. I thought I'd made peace with not having it. But it turns out we all want our parents to see us clearly," she said, "even when we have convinced ourselves we don't." A long pause. "How do you do that?" he said. "Do what?" "Find the true thing, in everything, the thing underneath." "Practice," she said, "and paying attention."
"Practice," she said, "and paying attention. It's the same thing you do, actually. You just do it in different rooms." She heard him exhale, that same slow release she had learned to listen for, the sound of something held too tight, finally letting go. "Come for breakfast," he said. "I'll make something." "You cook?" "Badly," he said, "but with effort." "That," she said, "is all anyone can ask." 18 months from the beginning. The Osei Baek Mobile Health Initiative, the name chosen after 3 weeks of negotiation between a stubborn Ghanaian doctor
and a very patient Korean man who lost the argument about which name should come first, operated in 9 regions across South Korea, with a sister program launched in 3 West African cities through a partnership with 2 international health organizations, and quietly, the continued involvement of a private fund that no longer needed to be hidden. The Yongsan Clinic had new chairs. Sora ran the community health education program and was 2 years into a nursing degree she had begun at 23, with a scholarship she had applied for on her own and received on her own, and told Temilade about 3 days after finding out, her face electric, with a joy that had nowhere to contain itself. Daesu still ran his Saturday first aid class. He had recently begun talking, carefully, about the possibility of a different kind of life. Temilade did not ask questions. She listened. She believed. And this was something she had come to understand about the work, about all the work, about every waiting room and every examination table and every hand held in crisis, that the most important thing medicine could offer was not always treatment. Sometimes it was just presence. Being there, paying attention, making space for people to become something other than what their worst moments had made them. Sejin had not walked away from the Baek organization. She had not asked him to.
She had asked him instead to be honest with her and with himself about what he was building and why, and to be willing to ask every day whether the choices he was making were the ones that led somewhere he wanted to arrive. He had. Not perfectly, not without difficulty, but he had. There was a morning in late spring when they were sitting on the balcony of the apartment she had kept, the smaller one she had told herself she would give up and somehow never had, and the city was soft below them with early light, and she was reading something for work, and he was looking at his phone, and neither of them was talking, and it was one of those unremarkable moments that turns out later to be the one you remember most clearly. "What are you thinking?" she said, not looking up from her reading. "I'm thinking," he said, "about what it means to be someone you are not ashamed of." She looked up then. He was looking at the city. His face was open in a way she had come to know, the way it looked when he was being honest without performance, when there was nothing between his face and what was actually true. "And," she said, "and I think I am getting closer," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said, "you are." She went back to reading. He went back to his phone. The morning went on. There is a Ghanaian proverb that says, "Obi nikire akura otro da." No one teaches the mushroom when to grow. Love is like this. You do not teach it. You do not engineer it. You cannot decide to begin it or determine the moment it takes hold. You can only be the kind of soil that allows it. You can only keep yourself clear of bitterness, of fear, of the impulse to close yourself off from anything that might hurt you, because that same closing also keeps out everything that might save you. Temilade Osei spent 12 years building medicine in places that did not want her. She learned in those years that the most dangerous thing in the world is not conflict or illness or even power. The most dangerous thing is the belief that certain people, certain lives, are beyond healing.
Baek Sejin spent 20 years building an empire on the understanding that safety was something you controlled through force. He learned, slowly and at considerable cost, that safety built on control is not safety at all. It is just a larger and more elaborate version of the fear that drove you to build it. What they built together, imperfect, complicated, ongoing, real, was something older than either of their vocabularies had words for. The kind of thing the elders told stories about. Two people who chose, over and over, in ordinary and extraordinary moments, to stay, to be honest, to give the other person something that no amount of power or protection could substitute for. To be seen.
And that is where we will leave them. Not at a conclusion, but at a beginning. Because the best love stories are not the ones that end with rescue. They are the ones that end with two people standing at the start of something real, knowing exactly what it costs, and choosing to pay it anyway. Thank you for watching, for staying with this story until the very end. If it moved you, if it made you feel something, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And before you go, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. We genuinely want to know who is part of this community. Subscribe if you haven't. There are more stories where this came from. And remember, love does not knock. It simply begins living in your house. Give it room. The end.